Today we're going to learn how to graph parabolas in vertex form. So previously we learned how to identify what is happening to the graph, but now we're going to learn how to actually graph them. There is another foldable today, so before we start you want to make sure you have your note page or your note packet. And we are going to be on page 5 today. You also need the foldable that says graphing parabolas in vertex form. And lastly, you're going to need a glue stick so you can glue that in. So just a couple reminders, and again, this is really similar to when we did absolute value, but the graph of f of x equals x squared. So just a reminder, f of x is just a fancy way to write y. So this is just saying y equals x squared. There's a couple important things to remember. So there's an axis of symmetry, and that just means that the graph looks the exact same on both sides. So if you were to fold your paper down this line, you can see how it would lay right on top of itself. The shape of the graph, the U shape, is called a parabola. And then our vertex is going to be either the highest or lowest point on that graph, and it's kind of where the graph starts. And if you look down here, this is the graph of negative x squared, and it's just flipped downward. We've filled this out several times now, but this is just our vertex form of a parabola. And so just a couple reminders. If I have a positive a value, it opens up. A negative a value would open down. If a is greater than 1, the graph gets skinny. And if it's a fraction between 0 and 1, the graph gets wide. If I have a positive h value, and so like written out again, remember this would be positive 2, the graph actually moves to the right. Even though you're seeing x minus 2, it moves to the right. If you have a negative h value, like negative 2, you would really be seeing x plus 2 squared, but it's actually going to move to the left because your h is technically negative. Lastly, our k, if we have a positive k value, the graph will not open, sorry about that, shift up. And if we have a negative k value, it will shift down. So just a reminder about what each of these letters in the formula mean. So there are 5 steps you're going to use to graph a parabola. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to identify and plot the vertex. We're going to sketch the line of symmetry. We're going to find a point to the right of the line of symmetry and graph its mirror. We're going to do the same thing for a second point, and we're going to use the 5 points to sketch the parabola. So for this first example, if you remember, the original graph, so y equals x squared, starts at 0, 0. So I'm just going to put a point there for now, and then I'm going to go look at my new equation and see which way I'm shifting. So remember this h value right here, this positive 3 means move right 3, and this positive k value 4 means up 4. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to plot our vertex. So I'm going to go to the right 3 and then up 4. And this is where my graph is going to start. And so right now I can fill in my vertex. My vertex is at 3, 4. Step 2 was to graph the axis of symmetry. And that's just a line that goes right through the vertex, so I'm just making mine a dotted line in red here. That line is the line x equals 3, and it's always going to be x equals whatever your x value of this ordered pair is. step 3 was to find a point to the right of the axis of symmetry. So the next point here is x equals 4. And so if I want to find the y value that goes with that, I'm going to use my equation up here. And I'm going to plug in this x equals 4. So that would look like this. And you can either type it into a calculator exactly as is, or you can kind of simplify by hand. So 4 minus 3 is 1. 1 squared is 1. And 1 plus 4 is 5. So again, if you want to use a calculator, that's fine. But this next ordered pair would be 4, 5. So I can add that point to my graph. And then I'm going to mirror it on the other side. So if you look, this is 1 away from the line, the axis of symmetry. So it's going to be 1 away on the other side. And you don't need to draw those in the counting I just did. Just trying to show you what that looked like. So I have a point right here. And I also have a point right here. I have to repeat that step. So I need to go to the right one more time. So my next x value is 5. So if x is 5, I do the same thing. I'm going to plug 5 into the equation. Again, either type it into your calculator or simplify. And I'm getting 8. So this next point is 5, 8. So I graph that. This time it's 2 away from the axis of symmetry, so it needs to be 2 away on the other side also. And then my final step was connect those 5 points to make your parabola. And just make sure you're putting arrows on the end of your graph. Lastly, it says max or min value. So this this vertex here, you want to figure out, is this the lowest point on the graph or the highest point on the graph? And since our graph is going up, this point's the lowest, which means it's a min. So we're going to do another example, the same thing we just did. So again, the graph y equals x squared starts at 0, 0. So I'm just going to put a point there to start. And then I'm going to come over to my equation, and I'm going to kind of figure out what is happening as far as shifting left, right, up, down. So for my h value, I'm seeing a positive 2. Again, remember the formula is minus, so technically there's a negative 2 here, which means move to the left 2. Out here I have a positive k value, which means up 5. So I'm going to follow those directions. I'm going to go left 2 and then up 5. And that is my vertex. And so my vertex is at negative 2, 5. Then you draw in your axis of symmetry, which goes right through the vertex. And remember, this is just the line x equals, and then whatever your x value is, so it's negative 2. The next step is to find a point to the right. So right now I'm at negative 2, so this right here is negative 1. So if x is negative 1, I need to figure out what y will be, and I do that by plugging negative 1 into my equation. Again, you can just use the calculator if you want. Just make sure you type in your parentheses and everything exactly like you see them. And I'm getting 4. So this point is going to be negative 1, 4. I want to mirror it on the other side, so it's 1 away from the axis of symmetry, so it'll be 1 away on the other side. And then I need to do this one more time. So I'm going to erase some of my extra points here that I put in. But the next x would be 0. And if x equals 0, Again, I'm going to plug it into the equation. Y would be 1. So my next point is 0, 1. It's 2 away from the axis of symmetry, so it needs to be 2 away on the other side. And then I'm going to connect all of those points to make my parabola. And last question, is it a max or a min? Is the vertex a max or a min? If you look, this graph opens down, which means that this vertex here is the highest point on the graph, and that means that it would be a max. Go ahead and take a few minutes to try this one, so pause the video and try to graph this equation. Okay, so hopefully you had some time to attempt this. Remember, typically y equals x squared starts at 0, 0. So I'm just going to put a point there, and then I come over to my equation and I'm going to read what's happening. So for my h value, I'm seeing a positive 4. The formula is actually written as x minus, and so what that means is this is really a negative 4, and that means I should be moving left 4. For my k value, I'm seeing a negative 3, so that means down 3. And so for my vertex, I'm going to start by moving left 4 and down 3, which puts my vertex at negative 4, negative 3. The second thing you should have done is draw in your axis of symmetry, which goes right through the vertex. And the axis of symmetry would be at x equals negative 4. The third thing you should have done is move to the right one, and you should have realized that that is an x of negative 3. And so you are going to take that x, plug it into your equation, and solve to get the y value. And once you solve, you should get the point negative 3, negative 3.5. So if I graph that, that's right here. If I mirror it to the other side, here. You're going to repeat that process one more time. So the next x value I have would be x equals negative 2. And then same thing, to get the y, I'm plugging it into the equation that they gave me. And then I'm going to solve for my y value. This time when I solve, I get negative 2, negative 5. So my next point is at negative 2, negative 5. And that's 2 away from the axis of symmetry, so I mirror it to the other side. Lastly, you connect your points to draw your parabola. You put arrows on the end, and then you have to identify, is this a max or a min? It's opening down, which makes my vertex the highest point on the graph, which means it's a max. Today, for your practice, you're going to do page 6 in your notes. So you're just going to finish page 6 by the end of the period.